And as you can probably tell behind me, today's episode is going to be all about kettles. Oftentimes people come into our shop asking about kettles, what the right kettle for them is, and there's really not a perfect answer for that unless you know exactly what your brewing needs are. As you can see behind me, there's quite an array of kettles here, and today I'm just going to go over these and kind of explain which one would be best for different situations, whether you're a beginning home brewer or an advanced home brewer that's looking to step up their system. Enjoy the episode and cheers, guys. So the first kettle I want to discuss with you is your basic 5-gallon stainless steel pot. This is something that's going to come with most homebrew kits. Nothing complicated to it at all. As you can see in there, just a standard pot. This is essentially going to be one step up from your, say, 2 or 3 gallon stock pot that you would naturally have at home. In this kettle, it's designed to boil partial extract boils, so of about 3 gallons or so. Nothing to say that you can't boil about 4 gallons of wort in here and say do a 3-gallon batch stewing with a full boil, but primarily these are going to be for extract brewers and doing partial boils with them. The nice thing about this size is if you do only have 2 or 3 gallons of wort, it's going to be easy enough just to dump out, so you can easily transfer into a fermenter without a spigot on them. So the nice thing with a 5-gallon pot is that they are very economical. This one happens to cost $36, and that should be about the price point that you'll find on them. This makes them a very nice option for the introduction brewer because they're not having to invest several $100s into a pot. So one great thing about the size of a 5-gallon kettle is that you can still use it on your stovetop. Basically all the other sizes I'm going to discuss today, you're going to want to use some kind of either propane or natural gas heat on them, where this one, either a natural gas stovetop or an electric stovetop, generally get it up to a boil in a reasonable amount of time. And that's mostly due to the fact that these are designed to boil a smaller volume. Another type of pot, other than the stainless, is you might find this size in aluminum as well. There's nothing wrong with brewing with aluminum. The only thing is that you will have to not use any type of alkaline cleaner on aluminum where stainless is okay. So let's say that you now want to step up to all grain brewing. In that case, you're going to have to do a full-size boil, which means you're boiling 6 to 7 gallons of wort instead of the 3 gallons of a partial boil, and you'll obviously need a larger pot for that. This pot happens to be very similar to just a basic stainless steel design. However, this pot is quite a bit larger. This pot is going to be about 8 gallons in volume and will give you enough headspace that you can boil that full volume. This is still a basic pot, which means that while brewing a full-size boil, things might get a little bit heavy. So it's going to be useful to have a friend help you dump it when you're transferring into a fermenter, or you also have the option of drilling a hole in the pot and putting on a weldless spigot. This pot is going to give you a price range of anywhere from about $75 to $80. This one actually happens to be on the very low end of that, with a price of $73 here in our shop. So one of the limitations of the 8-gallon kettle is that if you want to use an all-grain brewing method known as brew in a bag, it's going to limit you to a fairly low alcohol beer, generally no more than about 5%. And that has to do with the volume of the grains plus the volume of the wort in the pot exceeding the overall volume of the pot. If you do want to use a brew in a bag method and be able to produce beers that are a little bit higher alcohol, you'll have to step up to something similar to this kettle here. This one happens to be a 10-gallon kettle. This will suffice for a brew in a bag method. You can also see that as you start getting up in larger kettles, they start coming with add-ons. Most kettles that are 10 gallons or higher will come with a spigot on them, and it's actually really nice if you do have a kettle with a spigot on it to try to get one that has some kind of a dip tube in order to maximize the volume you can get out of the kettle without having to do a sort of awkward tipping motion of the kettle at the end of your boil. As you can see, this still has that sort of basic stainless steel design on the inside. Some will come with false bottoms. Not all of them though. You can also use the larger kettles as mash tuns, because generally a mash tun you'll want a little bit more volume than your actual kettle has. Another nice thing about a 10-gallon kettle is that you do have that head space in the kettle, so that as you have a hot break right as you start that boil, that's notorious for trying to boil over on you, you have a little bit more leeway when it comes to being able to control that hot break, as well as also being able to do an extended boil. For instance, if you do a barley wine, then you may want to do a 1.5 hour or even 2 hour boil, whereas if you did have something like this little 8-gallon kettle, it means you'd end up boiling down to below your 5-gallon batch size. Overall, the 10-gallon kettle is a great kettle for somebody that's getting introduced to all grain brewing, wants to impart a brew in a bag method, or wants to have that flexibility in brewing a high alcohol beer with an extended boil. The more serious home brewer might want to look at a 15-gallon kettle, because it has even more flexibility than a 10-gallon kettle. Generally, this will come standard with similar features as a 10-gallon kettle will, such as a ball valve and oftentimes a thermometer. You can see this one just has a port, doesn't have an actual thermometer in it right now. But also, what you're going to pay extra money for, generally somewhere around $250 to $300, is one, you've got thicker steel on them, which just make them overall more durable. Secondly, you'll also have what's called a triclad bottom. While you can find 10-gallon kettles with triclad bottoms, 15-gallon kettles are much more likely to have them. And what these do is they are essentially an aluminum plate that's been sandwiched in between two pieces of steel, and this allows better thermal conduction of energy from your propane burner into your kettle, which essentially means less fuel, faster boil times, and overall time savings of your brew day. One more thing that these larger kettles will have is most will come standard with hash marks on your volume. These are absolutely wonderful in a brew day, especially if you're using any kind of computer-based or online calculators. You can basically punch in your numbers for the calculator, it'll tell you how much water you need, and you can fill it up to that exact number. This kettle happens to have a dip tube that comes with it, which helps to maximize your work that's left in your kettle, which means you also won't have to do the awkward dump at the end of a brew day. Also, this SS kettle happens to have a port at the top, which they claim is for recirculation purposes. Oftentimes you'll probably find that making your own way to recirculate will be better. Something to consider when you do want to purchase a 15-gallon size kettle will be the extended cost of investing in a pump and a hosing. So what this will do is allow you to pump wort from the kettle if you need to pump it up, say, into a fermenter that's higher than the kettle, or recirculate the wort to improve your efficiency of cooling it after your boil. This is going to be especially important if you do decide to scale up to, say, 10-gallon batch sizes, because that will generally get to the point where most people will not be able to comfortably lift the kettle to a higher level in order to either transfer via gravity to a fermenter or dump the kettle into a fermenter. So lastly, we've got Big Bertha here. This is a 30-gallon stainless steel kettle. And similar to the 15-gallon and even 10-gallon, this one is going to have all of the same features with ball valves, generally ports for thermometers, and etch marks inside of them. This kettle is going to be quite expensive just due to the overall material involved in making it. Generally, these are going to run you about $350 to $400 for a good kettle. They'll also have triclad bottoms, which you'll definitely need to heat them up. One thing with this size is that you have to consider that your mash volume is going to be very, very large, and you may have to scale up instead of having, you know, your standard cooler mash tun into an actual second kettle of a mash tun. When you do mash in batches this large, the heat loss from the kettle actually becomes fairly negligible, so you can actually use a kettle with a false bottom in it to mash and lose maybe a couple degrees of heat is all throughout a 60-hour mash rest. This kettle will be ideal for brewing somewhere in approximately 20 to 25 gallon batches. So this is going to be obviously for an absolute enthusiast, somebody that's wanting to do pilot batches for a nano brewery, or somebody that actually just doesn't want to spend a lot of time brewing, and so when they do want to brew, wants to brew a lot of beer at a time. Another thing to consider when you scale up to a kettle this large is going to be your burner. While your standard banjo burner will be able to work, it is recommended to get one that has a higher pressure regulator, generally something around at least 10 psi, preferably one with a 30 psi. If you're running a propane burner for natural gas, that's going to vary depending on what burner style you choose for that. But that is something to consider when it comes to overall time that you're going to have to spend heating this kettle up. So something else to consider when making a kettle purchase, regardless of the size of kettle, is going to be what's called the height to width ratio. Generally, most of the ones that we have back here are going to be right around 2 to 1, which means that the height is twice as large as the width. And what this does is it affects how fast your boil off rate is. And your boil off rate is something that you'll have to dial in, and that will actually dictate a little bit of the efficiency of your system, because obviously a higher boil off rate means you're going to be starting with more wort, which means you can rinse grains if you're doing all grain more thoroughly and get more of those sugars out of the grains. Something like a kegel will generally have about a 3 to 1 width or height to width ratio, and that will not have nearly as much boil off as a 2 to 1 ratio. So just to recap everything, you have your basic kettle that's 5 gallons, designed to do extract brewing on a stovetop. As you work your way up, you'll want to invest in a propane burner in order to heat your wort in a more timely manner. And once you get up to 10 gallons, you can now do brew in a bag style beer. 15 gallons, you can now do 10-gallon boils. You can still use brew in a bag method as well in this. Or if you want to go to a full-size big boy 30-gallon kettle, you can do up to 25-gallon batches at a time in this. More likely you'll be doing 20 or 15, but it gives you that scalability, and you'll also want to invest in a burner that's going to be cut out to heat that much volume. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video today. Just to make things clear, we're not necessarily associated with any brand behind me. We just happen to have them in the shop. I would encourage you to go do some research on some of the brands out there and figure out the best one for you. Otherwise, I hope you learned a little bit from this video to help you make a good decision on what kettle to choose for your next investment. Make sure to like our video if you liked it today, and subscribe to our channel. Also, if you want to check us out on Facebook, we'll put a link in the description below. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on Genus Brewing, and cheers, guys! Or just trying to scale up your system. Enjoy. I don't have a beer. That's not our MO. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Genus Brewing channel, and as you can probably tell behind me, today's episode is going to be all about kettles. Oftentimes people come into our shop asking about kettles, what the right kettle for them is, and there's really not a perfect answer for that unless you know exactly what your brewing needs are. As you can see behind me, there's quite an array of kettles here, and today I'm just going to go over these and kind of explain which one would be best for different situations, whether you're a beginning home brewer or an advanced home brewer that's looking to step up their system. Enjoy the episode and cheers, guys. So the first kettle I want to discuss with you is your basic 5-gallon stainless steel pot. This is something that's going to come with most homebrew kits. Nothing complicated to it at all. As you can see in there, just a standard pot. This is essentially going to be one step up from your, say, 2 or 3 gallon stock pot that you would naturally have at home. In this kettle, it's designed to boil partial extract boils, so of about 3 gallons or so. Nothing to say that you can't boil about 4 gallons of wort in here and say do a 3-gallon batch stewing with a full boil. But primarily these are going to be for extract